Hello, everyone. Welcome to the September Sales Skills Training webinar being presented by David Hoffeld. As you have seen on the RB Academy notices, this webinar will train on the learning essential commitments that you must obtain throughout the sale. So at this time, let me introduce David.
Thank you, Wendy, and welcome to all of you who are joining us for a very important topic, and that is obtaining commitments throughout the sale. Let me address one thing, though, before we jump into this and we go to our first poll question. Which we will in a second, and that is that sales training that Wendy just mentioned. I know there's only a few spots open, but let me talk about what that's going to be for just a second. Bear with me. That is going to be different than any other type of sales training that most likely you've been to, in that there will be very little lecture. It's all extremely hands-on. It's intense. It's 2.5 days of presentations, and the exciting thing is I'm not going to be presenting. It will be all the attendees. We're going to be presenting their presentation. We'll be critiquing it, giving them things to work on. They'll go off and work on it, come back later that day, present again and again and again with constant feedback. And we've done this now, this type of training, a couple different times, and each time it's produced some really exciting results. We can get people from where they are to where they need to be very quickly in a matter of days. And then you're going to walk out with a clear roadmap of what you want to do in the future. So this is not a come listen to me lecture for a couple days. This is hands-on right from the get-go. You're going to be presenting numerous times, and it'll be a lot of work, but it's all about improving those sales results. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, I would consider it. I know it's not too far away, but opportunities like this don't come along very often to get this type of in-depth training. And so give that a thought. But enough about that. Let's jump into commitments, because boy, do these matter in this sale. And let's talk about why they matter. And to do that, I want to share with you our poll question. And that is this: why do commitments matter in selling? Option 1, they don't matter. Share your product and it'll sell itself. Option 2, they're reference points our brains use for buying decisions. Option 3, they help us see if we're getting buy-in to what we're sharing. Option 4, lack of commitment results in objections. And option 5, options 2, 3, and 4. So a number of choices here. Wendy, how can our attendees vote on which option they think is the most accurate answer to the question?
Yep, so you should all see the poll on your screen now. Using your mouse or finger, click on your answer. And then once everyone completes their selection, I will close the poll. And at that time, you'll see a recap of the answers, and David will review the results. So it looks like they're all coming in. About halfway there. All right, looks like we are finished with everyone voting. And there we've got our answer.
All right, let's see. We got the first option, no one chose, they don't matter. Share your product and it will sell itself. Of course, that's the wrong answer, because the question implies they matter, and I've already said that, and I think all of you already know that too, so that didn't fool anybody. The reference points our brains use, no one chose that. They help us see if we're getting buy-in to what we're sharing. 11% did choose that, and they're right, that is certainly true, but the most accurate answer is that last one. Options 2, 3, and 4. So option 2, they are reference points our brains use when forming buying decisions. That's what quite a bit of research, decades of it, show. That's kind of the science behind how we know commitments matter, is there's overwhelming amounts of research that shows they matter. They also do, as some of you pointed out, help us see if we're getting buy-in to what we're sharing. Absolutely. And this is mission critical, because people can nod their heads when you're presenting, let's say, for example, about Rebath. They can grunt, or once in a while they'll go, that makes sense. And what does that mean? Nothing. That's what that means. It means they comprehend what you're saying, which is good. It doesn't mean they commit to it, right? Comprehension is about understanding. Commitments change future behavior, right? It's the difference between me saying, does it make sense why us meeting together tomorrow to review commitments would be advantageous? And you saying, yeah, it makes sense. And it doesn't mean you're going to show up tomorrow, but if I said, will you show up tomorrow at 1 o'clock your time to review commitments, and you said yes, that's a commitment. That changes future behavior, and that's the difference. The second to last option, lack of commitment results in objections, is also true. This was really one of the biggest aha moments I had years and years and years and years and years ago. We talk about it briefly in my book, The Science of Selling, very briefly, is as we were identifying what commitments matter in selling. So commitments matter, but certain ones seem to matter more than others. What are those certain ones? The hypothesis was, and it was just that at that time, this is a while back, that commitments, lack of commitment is a breakdown in the buying process, and that results in an objection. So one of the ways we began to identify what commitments matter, what were the building blocks of the sale, is we began categorizing objections and getting down to the foundational level and then saying, well, that must be a lack of commitment to something. And we began to test that over years and years and years, and we were able to show it validated. And it's really interesting. Way long time ago, I remember going into working with salespeople, all kind of different companies, and I would have them list all their objections, and I would write them down, and I could tie each of them to one of what I call the 6 whys, those 6 essential commitments that are really what matter in the sales process. So really interesting. So that's true. So of course, the right answer, the best answer, option 2, 3, and 4, the final choice. So let's get into, I want to get real practical today, and I want to talk about exactly how do we do commitments? What should we say? So the first thing I want to share with you is all the commitments you should get in the sales presentation, right? It's hard to get these commitments if you don't know what they are. So I'm going to give them to you, and let's just do it right now. And what we're going to do is going to look at in the inspection and throughout the whole presentation, the first commitment we want to get is that they want to do something. This is usually pretty easy, right? We walk into a home, they've called us here for a reason. Now, many salespeople that I've worked with in other industries, this is a real struggle, right? Why change? Why do anything? For Rebath, not as much. We do encounter it sometimes. We have to get them to move forward now versus wait, but usually by the time they've talked to us, they've already gone through a lot of these steps and they have committed they want to do something. This is also really useful when you go into a bathroom and it's immaculate, right? You look around and you're like, well, this is really nice. There's no mold, there's no staining, there's no nothing, right? And oftentimes we can get seduced by this and we're like, well, why in the world would you want to change? Well, they called you for a reason, right? So I want to get a commitment that this bathroom they have, they might want to change for just cosmetic reasons. They don't like the color, the look, whatever. Then I want to get a commitment they want to throw this in the dumpster somewhere. So, and then I move on. No longer do we talk about what they have, we talk about what they're going to get, right? So we transition. That's the first commitment. Second commitment in the inspection is that buying criteria. And hopefully all of you have focused on that because, boy, that buying criteria matters. That sets you up for success in every part of the presentation. So you want to make sure you establish that well and get a commitment to it. And the script and all the videos we have walks you through exactly how to do that. The digital presentation, the contractor option. We want a commitment after product quality. Here's what that looks like. Would you ever want to put these type of products back in your bathroom ever again, right? That's what you want to ask right there, right? So you've gone through and you've talked about the product quality, and then you hit them with that commitment question. If they commit, you move forward. If not, you deal with it. And we'll talk about how to deal with it in just a minute. We also want to get a commitment at a minimum, and these are minimum commitments. These are the mission critical ones you always want to be attentive to on every sales call you run. And that is at the end of the buying criteria on that your experience slide. So this is at the end of the contractor option. You've gone through it all. You go through the buying criteria. You show, they say to you, well, this doesn't meet the things I said I wanted. And then you get them to commit that this is not the solution that they want, and you move on. This will help you knock out other bids. It will help you knock out your really number one competitor, which is the contractor option or them doing it themselves, right? And so we'll talk about what to do if you struggle with these commitments. But for right now, let's look at what they are. And then, of course, the designer. At the end of the buying criteria slide in the designer, this one's really easy. Rarely are you ever going to struggle with this. and if you're doing it even a halfway decent job, and that is you get a commitment at the end that this option doesn't meet what they said they wanted. And that's what the buying criteria is. It's what do I want for my bathroom? What would the right solution look like? So we don't leave it up to chance. We help them identify that in the bathroom, and then we guide them in making that commitment. So these are the commitments, and we're going to keep going on, but I would say you want to be attentive to, at the end of every sales presentation, you might want to think about, okay, if I didn't get the sale, why? Now, let me give you an insight here that some of the top salespeople I've ever trained in Rebath have used to grow their sales very quickly. They analyze their commitments after the sale. They do what's called a win-loss analysis, a very common term in selling, and they analyze, well, why did I win or why did I lose, which is usually very beneficial to understand. Well, how do you know why you lost? What you want to focus on is what commitments didn't you obtain? That'll often reveal, you're going to find that some commitments are harder than others for every salesperson, myself included. And that reveals a weakness in your sales process. And that's where you focus on improving. So for example, if I'm dealing with a top salesperson, right? They're going to, let's say they struggle, they lose a few sales, and they go, boy, it's right in that contractor option. When I ask about, would you want to put these products back in your bathroom, people are wishy-washy, they're not committal. Okay, why am I inspiring a lack of commitment? And they dive in to that part of the process, they improve it, and then the commitment gets made, and then the output of that, the outcomes of that are an increase in sales, right? So commitments are the building blocks of sales. So don't be seduced by what happens at the end of the sale. Focus on what happens throughout the sale, because what happens at the end of the sale is created right here with commitments. And then we get to the Rebath section. We want to get a commitment after the company section, right? We talk about Rebath as a company. Based on what you now know about Rebath, are we the company you would feel comfortable inviting into your home to do work on your bathroom? We want a commitment at the end of the warranty section. Would you ever want to invest in products for your bathroom that did not come with a strong warranty? We want a commitment to DuraBath and Natural Stone. So now that you know a little about our two types of wall systems, which one do you think is best for you and your home? And they're going to commit to one or the other. And then, of course, a commitment at the end of the Rebath section, right before we go into design, as we bring up that buying criteria again, show them that Rebath fulfills all of what they want except the design option, because we haven't talked about that yet. We're going to talk about design in just a moment. And so you say, other than the design of the bathroom and the cost, which we haven't talked about yet, is there any other reason why you would not move forward with Rebath? And ideally, we want to hear, well, no. I mean, if we can design the bathroom and we can afford it, we're in. Excellent. That tells me I did a great job. And so that's what I want. So these are the commitments I want to ask for. A lack of commitment is always a problem. Overwhelming amount of research on this, so I'll talk about it for just a few seconds. And that is, if someone won't commit to any of these things, guess what else they're not going to do today? Buy. They're not going to buy anything, right? These are the building blocks of the sale. So we want to really be attentive to these. So these are the commitments, the previous slide and this one. These are the one you want to focus on when you do your win-loss analysis after the sale. Look at, okay, where am I struggling? And you always want to ask that, where am I getting the weakest commitments? That tells you that part of your presentation is what you need to focus on. It gives you kind of a criteria by which you can judge how you're doing, right? You don't have to wait for them to say you're doing a good job. You can tell yourself by these commitments. And so it allows you to consistently improve. And that is how the top people that I've worked with who win more than they lose in Rebath and have for years and years and years, how they get to that point is they just become just relentless on these commitments. And it makes a profound difference in what they do and how they sell. So let's talk about how do we obtain these commitments, and then what do we do if they won't give them to you? So we want to focus on, when we ask for a commitment, what we found matters, and there's a lot of research on this as well, is that what happens just before you ask for the commitment shapes the perception of it. So one of the things to look at, if you're finding it's not coming off well, or it seems abrupt when you ask for the commitment, it may be. And you want to focus then on what comes just before. This gets to a psychological principle called priming, which matters because as salespeople, we are waiting in psychology every time we go into a sales call. And priming says exposure to one idea shapes how you'll respond to subsequent information. My favorite example of priming we can all relate to is doing what these people are doing in the picture, watching a scary movie. If you watch a scary movie, usually we choose to do this late at night for some reason. And after you watch this movie, you get ready for bed probably, and you notice strange sounds in your house. You check the doors to make sure they're locked. You hear little creaks that you might have heard before, but your brain filtered it out. But this time you go, what was that? And you go and check the doors again, or look under beds or whatever, right? Why is that? Well, that movie put you in a heightened state of awareness to strange sounds. That's an example of priming. There are many, many examples, many studies on this that show how powerful it is. Well, how do we use it here at Rebath? We want to guide our buyers in affirming the value or lack of value the commitment is based on immediately before asking them for the commitment. Very simple process, very easy to do. Let me show you an example of it. So here I am in the contractor option, okay? And I've just talked about product quality. And so I'm getting ready to ask for a commitment that we just talked about a few moments ago that I showed you on the first slide. But I want to prepare them for it. So I'm going to ask them to affirm the lack of value the commitment is based upon. This is not complicated. It's very simple, and it works. So here's what that would sound like. So I presented about the contractor option so far, the limited design guidance, and the product quality. And then I'll say, does it make sense why so many people are moving away from this option? Because the products are porous. They have that low quality. And let's say my prospect predictably says, which most of them will, unless we really miss the boat, they'll go, yeah, I understand the problems with it. Again, they're saying, I understand. And they're not committing to anything yet. They're just, this is comprehension. But what they are doing is affirming the lack of value the commitment is based upon. So they're affirming it. So here's what comes next. Would you ever put these types of products in your bathroom again? Now we're going for the commitment, right? Now, why does this matter? Well, look at this real quickly. That commitment, let's look at what happened before. I said, does it make sense? Let's just stop right there. And I said, does it make sense? And I went on, and they said, sure, right? It makes sense, okay? So they've affirmed this idea makes sense. People are moving away from this option. And then I also leverage social proof, right? So many people, and not only does it make sense, but so many people are doing this behavior. And they said, yes, they affirmed that. Now, when I go to the commitment, would you ever put these types of products in your bathroom again? What do they have to do to not commit? Well, I've made it a little hard for them because they have to defy what they agreed just makes sense and that so many people are doing, right? They didn't object that, well, that doesn't make sense, or I don't think a lot of people are doing this. No, they said, yeah, sure, I see the problems with it, right? What they did was they affirmed the lack of value the commitment is based on. That's powerful stuff. That's powerful stuff because it works. It works in the real world. And so you can guide people into saying things like you see on your screen. No, I definitely don't want those kinds of products. Now, it doesn't always work perfectly like this, and we're going to talk about what do we do when it doesn't. But we can increase the likelihood of getting a commitment by priming them. Focus on what do you say just before you ask for a commitment. So, for example, if you say, David, when I ask for a commitment, it just feels awkward. It feels abrupt. People are, I feel like I'm pushing them. Well, then stop. Right. You're not preparing them mentally, and you're feeling that tension. You shouldn't feel that. Right? If I say, does it make sense of something, and so many people are doing it, and you say yes, and then I ask you to do it, that flows very naturally. It doesn't feel forced. You're guiding them, nudging them into the commitment, and it's quite powerful. Priming is really powerful. In fact, last year, a behavioral economist slash social psychologist slash cognitive psychologist out of the University of Chicago, Richard Thaler, won a Nobel Prize for his work in what he refers to as nudging, right? Which over 136 countries are using his research, including our own, in a number of really interesting and meaningful ways. And what is he talking about was part of his research, and that won a Nobel Prize. This is not small, inconsequential things, is guiding people into decisions, preparing them, looking at decisions contextually. He likes to use the term choice architecture. So we don't just ask for choices, We architect them, we prepare people for them, and there's a lot of interesting ways to do that. This is just one, but this one works very well, very simple. So, long and short of it is, look at what you're doing just before you're asking for a commitment, and that will very often change how they perceive the commitment. Okay, but let's go on and talk about what happens when you don't get a commitment, right? What if they don't give a strong commitment like I just showed on the previous slide? What do you do then? Boy, does this matter. When I identified that commitments are the building blocks of the sale, and there's so much research on it, well, then a problem came right to the forefront that I had to address many, many years ago, and that is, well, what do you do if you don't get commitment? So, okay, commitments matter. What happens if you don't get it? Well, that created about 2 years of headache for me, but here's what we found. There's quite a bit of research on this too, and that's where I went to a lot of the data from social psychology that have looked at some of these now Nobel Prize winning research studies and say, well, what do you do when people don't commit? If commitments matter and you want to guide people into certain mutually beneficial behaviors that are good for the individual and society, what happens if they don't do that? How do you handle it? Well, we're not alone. Thank God there's tens of thousands of studies, and if you're willing to read them, you can yield a lot of really interesting data. So how do you handle non-committal responses? As I mentioned, this is not a minor issue, and you have to get good at this. So anytime I teach, for example, new hires, I just beat it in their heads about commitments and how to handle these. So they become masters before they ever get a lead of dealing with this issue. Because if not, it'll cost them sales that should have been theirs, but they lost it right here. Okay. So a non-committal response, what is that? Any reaction that is not a strong commitment. So let's define terms first of all. There's two types. First, there's an objection. Now, this is usually a little easier to handle for most salespeople. What really throws them is the second one, which is a weak response. So, for example, when you go in for a strong commitment, an objection is someone saying, well, I disagree with that, or I'm not sure if I buy into that yet, okay, then I handle that. That's very obvious. A weak response is someone saying, maybe, I don't know, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. So you, in the contractor option, you say, would you ever put these kind of products back in your bathroom? And this guy, whom you spent over an hour with, laughed at some of his corny jokes already. You're in his house, and his cat keeps bothering you. His dog keeps coming over and sniffing you. And now he says to you, I don't know, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, right? What do you do with that? How do you handle this guy? Well, let me show you exactly what to do and put a smile on his face and yours. And that is, how do you handle these non-committal responses? First of all, if you get an objection, you handle it like an objection. We're not going to go into that. We have already talked about that in many other webinars, and there's a lot of videos and resources on that. The more challenging one is, how do you handle a non-committal response? So if they throw price at you, let's just start with that, because this will often come up when they say, well, it depends on what it costs. That's a fair assessment, actually, because you haven't talked about costs yet, and they feel the weight of the commitment, because commitments matter, right? If someone commits to something and then goes back on it, we in our society call them liars, hypocrites, unstable, stupid, all kind of negative things, and you can justify those comments because they have a lack of integrity, we can say, right? They're unstable. Something's wrong with them. So if they throw a price at us, they go, well, hey, listen, it depends on what something better would cost. Okay, how do you deal with that? First of all, isolate. Other than price, is there any other reason why you wouldn't want Rebath to remodel your bathroom? Or go back to the contractor option. I understand. Other than price, is there any other reason why you'd ever want to put these type of products back in your bathroom ever again? Well, of course not. No. Right? So I isolate. I don't want to fight the battle of price yet. We have some really cool stuff you can do later on, but not right now. I want to get the commitment. So I'm going to isolate price. Price gets a pass for now, though I do not forget. And we have some really cool strategies to address that, but we're going to wait. So we isolate. Now, I want to go in for my commitment, and if they won't commit, I want to find out why. Let's talk about this. When we get a weak, wishy-washy response, which is often what happens here if you're presenting well, recognize what's going on. Our customer, our buyer, is not saying no. They're saying, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, or maybe, or I don't know, or I'll give that some thought. These are not no's. They're just non-committal. They're like weak. They're wishy-washy. They're leaning in your direction, but they are not making the commitment. So what do? Here it is right now. You get them to defend their position in your favor. Get them to defend their position in your favor. Now, if you're like, David, what does that mean in English? Here it comes. If it's against a competitor, you want to use here's the phrase I would use. What are your concerns? So let's go back to the contractor option. And I say, would you ever want to put these kind of products back in your bathroom after product quality? The second part of the contractor presentation. And they say, I don't know, something to think about, or wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, or yeah, I'll give that some thought. Okay, that's not a commitment. I'm not going to move on because that's a problem. If I move on and act like nothing happened, that'll bite me at the end of the sale. I cannot do that. That'll cost me money and it'll cost you money. So what do? Get them to defend the position in their position in my favor. So how do I do that? I'd say, well, it doesn't sound like you're excited about this contractor option with that poor product quality. What are your concerns? Now they're going to process it. They're going to go, well, I guess like you said, this, and that, right? So now what are they doing? They're affirming the lack of value that the commitment is based on, right? It's a very easy, non-confrontational way to guide someone into a deep commitment. What if it's in favor of Rebath? So I ask them for a commitment to Rebath, and they go, yeah, sounds okay. I'll give it some thought. Sounds good to me. Let's do that right now. So I'll say, well, it sounds like you're definitely interested in Rebath. If you were to have Rebath remodel your bathroom, what do you think the benefits would be? And they'll stop, they'll think about it, and they'll say, well, I guess it'll be this, and that. It's a very, very powerful way to get someone to affirm the value, or if it's against the competitor, lack of value, the commitment is based on. Really, really powerful stuff. Boy, use this and watch what happens. I would write these terms down and then practice them. Practice getting a weak wishy-washy response before you go and run an actual sales call, and then say, okay, if it's against my competitor, what are your concerns? If it's in favor of us, what do you think the benefits would be, right? And this will nudge people, and it will really help them see clearly the idea the commitment is based on. So let's apply this to a real-world scenario. Let's go back to that contractor option we were just in. Does it make sense why so many people are moving away from this option? And they say, yes, I understand the problems with it. Would you ever want to put these types of products back in your bathroom again? And they go, well, I'm not sure. What does a weak salesperson do? They move on and go, okay, well, thank you for that information. I'll move on. And they move on, and that cost them the sale. The sale is right here. And this is not hard to address because they didn't object. They just said, well, I'm not sure. They need a little more information. Here's how you handle it. It doesn't sound like you're excited about having those porous products back in your bathroom. If you put them in your bathroom, what would be your biggest concerns? And your potential client will stop and they'll think for a moment, right? Something they might not have done up to this point. And they'll say, well, they can say something like, I guess I could experience some of that water damage that you've been talking about since you came in the door. Okay, that makes sense. So based on the fact that you could experience some water damage, do you really want to put these porous products back in your bathroom ever again? No, when you put it like that, it wouldn't make sense to. Smartest thing they said all day, right? Absolutely right. So let's look at what we did right there. Start at the top. It doesn't sound like you're excited about it. And their response, they said, well, right, they weren't excited for sure. So that's a very true statement. What are your concerns? Now they're going to think about it, and then they're going to share their concerns, right? Because that's the question you ask them. You're going to say, that makes sense. Then you're going to mirror their language. And there's a lot of interesting research on mirroring verbal and nonverbal communication. One of the most powerful ways the data shows, and I'm sure many of you have experienced as well, to mirror people is their language, right? It's one thing to mirror their nonverbal behavior, and there's a lot of validity to that. A lot of great research that shows that matters, builds rapport, builds trust. But I think, and I've seen, mirroring the verbal behavior is even more impactful. Why? Because you're literally speaking their language. And when you quote someone, two things always happen. Number one, they perk up. Because let's be honest, most of the people we talk to are not quoted on a regular basis. Okay, they're just not. So this is a new experience for many of them. They're like, oh, this feels good, right? You're really listening. You're demonstrating that. Second thing that happens is it's hard to disagree with yourself, right? If someone says, well, you mentioned earlier, and they quote you, it's hard to go, well, I didn't mean that literally. You have to do a lot of finagling and wiggling to get out of that. And so when you quote someone, it's hard to disagree. So leverage their words in your favor, quote them, and then go back in. And the scenario I just laid out, you just saw, is not unusual. That gets played out every single day in very similar verbiage when people in Rebath who understand how to do what I just showed you, they deploy this in their home. It is incredibly powerful. So you want to know about how to actually obtain commitments, and then you also want to know what do you do when you don't get a commitment. You must become a master of this. And if you do not, it will cost you an excessive amount of money. So I would want to work on this right away. If you don't think, man, am I strong at this? If not, it's super easy to learn. Give me an hour of practice and you'll have it down. It's very, very simple. So let's talk about a little exercise that could be done. So let's say you're in a digital presentation and you present in Rebath and you go in for a commitment, right? And you ask for that commitment and the person says, well, I need to think about that. Let me give that some thought, right? What could we say, right? So let me give you an example. Here's what it would look like. Well, it sounds like you like Rebath. What do you think the benefits would be if you were to have Rebath remodel your bathroom? And they're going to say, well, and they're going to cite whatever was most impactful to them in your presentation, right? So if they go, I don't know, that means they weren't listening and you got to go back and recap some things. But if they were paying attention and you were doing a good job, they might say things like, you have a lot of experience, great reputation, you can remodel my bathroom in less time than the contractor. That makes sense. So based on the fact that we quote their reasons, mirror their verbiage, is Rebath the remodeler that you would like to do work in your bathroom? It literally is as simple as that. I am not oversimplifying this. If you get good at this, you'll find that guiding people into commitments is relatively easy if you're doing a good presentation. The key is you must be equipped to handle a lack of commitment. If you're not, you will lose sales that should be yours. I cannot stress this enough. This is one of those mission critical things. Oftentimes when we're doing sales training, we talk about a lot of things, but there are a few things that matter more than other things. This is one of those things that matters a great deal. You want to master this because this will make a noticeable impact on your performance. So we talked about commitments. To recap here before we look at some questions that you may have, we've talked about commitments. First, we looked at which commitments matter, right? The specific commitments throughout the entire sales process that you want to be extremely attentive to. Second, we looked at how do you prepare people for those commitments? How do you prime them so that they're receptive to the commitments and you can guide them in and you can leverage choice architecture and all that great research and make it easy for people to get commitments. And then third, we looked at what do you do when you don't get a commitment? And sometimes that'll happen. It won't be your fault. It'll just be that the person isn't ready yet. They still need a little more information. And so you get them to defend their position in your favor. And you use phrases when it's against a competitor, what are your concerns? If it's in favor of us, what are the benefits? And you guide them into affirming the value or lack of value that the commitment is based on. And if you can master what we've talked about today, you will be on your way to being extremely successful in Rebath. And when you do lose a sale, congratulations, you're going to know why. You're never going to walk out and say, I don't know, they don't have any money, right? Or the leads here are not very good. No, you're going to know exactly where am I weakest, right? Because my philosophy is I want to get something from every person I try to sell to. Either I want to get a sale and make commission, or I want to get better. And this gives you the insights to get better. It is the most accurate, most effective way that I believe exists for you to improve quickly as a sales professional. And that is look at your commitments. Where are you weakest? That's where you focus. Very, very powerful commitments. So with that, Wendy, let me turn it back over to you. Do we have any questions?
Not yet. So reminder to everyone that there's the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. So please go ahead and type those in right now, and we will get David to answer those for you. Anything
One
you want to
question
share, David?
You got a question?
No, not yet.
Oh, one question that I'll answer that I think is a good one that people will sometimes ask is how do I best practice this? Okay, so you've watched the web event, you've seen me do it a couple times, you've seen examples of it. What you want to do is actually practice doing this without notes. Let me jot down some of the responses or look at some of the slides that we have here, and then you want to practice with another person if possible. If not, practice by yourself. But what that means is you're saying it out loud. So you go in for the commitment and then say, I'm going to imagine that someone says, I need to think about it. Okay, what would I say? And then I want to say that out loud. I want to practice that. Sometimes you can even write down objections on like little note cards, 3 or 4 of them, mix them up. And then as you go in for the commitment, just turn one over and then read it out loud and then respond to it, right? And you can practice by yourself out loud. But practicing is not just watching me do it or watching a video about it. It's actually doing it out loud, training your brain so that when you get in that situation, your default is, well, it doesn't sound like you're excited about this contractor option. If you were to have it, what are some of your concerns, right? You just go right there. You don't have to think about it. It just is a reflex almost. And that comes through training, repetition. Repetition is the key to mastery. And so you want to practice, practice, practice. Give me an hour with this. This isn't hard content. Give me an hour and it can change your whole career. Seriously, it can really make some noticeable impact on performance.
You're looking pretty thorough, David. I don't see any questions coming in.
Okay. Well, I would say next steps, my recommendation would be to get on this. If you think that anything I've shared here is not something you're strong in, I would focus on this immediately. I mean, today. There's no better time to get better than, well, right now. And so I would try to carve out 30 minutes here, 45 minutes, an hour, sometime today or at latest tomorrow, and try to get this down because it does not take long to master. But when you master it, it will give you such insight into how you're performing, and it will, more importantly, help your potential clients make those strong commitments that are good for them and good for you. Everyone wins when we do this, and everyone, you and the client, lose when we don't. So this is what real productive selling is, especially at Rebath. This matters so much. So I'd encourage you, strongly encourage you, spend some time with this content because it will make a profound impact on your sales performance immediately. You will see a rise in your closing rates immediately when you get this down.
David, we got a good question.
All right.
How do you handle customers who are fine with Home Depot or Lowe's products and perceive Rebath products as the same price point?
Good question. That is a really good one. So then we got to reframe. So we got to change that belief, right? So they come in with the belief, and it's great that you're identifying that. Hopefully we're identifying that early on. So they're not seeing any difference there. So that gets into, we want to handle that right in the contractor option, first of all, and then again in the Rebath option. So we want to address that head on. We want to make sure we lump the contractor option up with those Home Depot and those Lowe's products. That's where contractors go to get their products. So I wouldn't even say that. They go to places like Lowe's or Home Depot. And the issue a lot of people have with that, and then I go through. And so I want to guide them in understanding that rightly and accurately. So I got to do some reframing. And the same is true when I get to the Rebath section, right? I want to go in there and talk about how we're different from Lowe's or Home Depot. And if I know that's a belief that they have, I might even address it head on. I know earlier you mentioned about Lowe's and Home Depot products. Let me explain to you a couple of the ways that Rebath products are night and day difference from them. And then I'm going to go through and talk about them. So now, does it make sense why the Home Depot products and Lowe's are significantly different from Rebath? Do you understand the differences between the two? Absolutely, I do. Okay. All things being equal, which of those would you choose? Would you choose based on what you know right now, Rebath or Lowe's or Home Depot, based on what you know about the products? Well, it depends on what the price is, David. Depends on how much Rebath costs. Fair enough. Other than price, which would you choose? I mean, if they were the exact same price, which would you choose? Well, of course, I choose Rebath. Why is that? Well, because of this, and that. Right? See, that's what I'm doing, right? So I'm going for those commitments. I'm just like a pit bull grabbing onto those commitments. And when I don't get them, it's a problem. So I just ask questions, get them to affirm the value the commitment's based on. So I wouldn't run from that. If someone brings that up to you, congratulations, you got that. That came out early. And now I can have a multi-pronged strategy of how to address that proactively in the sale. And I want to do it proactively because, as all of us know, if I don't address that head on, I'll hear it at the end. I'll hear it at the close when I show them price. Then they'll bring it up. And so I need to address it right away. So I'd establish it in the contractor option, first of all, and then in the rebath, I'm going to go through our products, bring it head on now, and make them choose. And the beautiful thing is, I'm in the presentation. I have all these slides. If they forgot something, I can go back and do it. You can't do that at the close. The worst time to handle an objection is at the end of the sale because you do not have time on your side. Right? You just don't. That's the reality of it. And if you've been in sales for more than 10 minutes, you know that. Right? You want to find these out earlier proactively, and commitments do that. They do that in an effective manner. Sometimes the way we try to find objections is just haphazard. Some salespeople, they early in the sale, and just a bunch of nonsense that doesn't work in the real world. This does. It's quite impactful. So that's exactly how I would handle it. That would be what I would do. If I heard that early on, I would establish it in the contractor, establish how rebath is different, make it crystal clear, and then make them choose. When they choose in my favor, then I ask them why, get them to defend the position, which makes it stronger. And now I have a stronger commitment to rebath, and I can take them all kind of different places.
That was it, David.
All right, excellent. Well, hopefully that was a great question because that demonstrated a little bit of how powerful these are. And you can imagine when you get good at this, you become very difficult to say no to. And of course, then your sales go up and you can help people make the right decision for them, which is rebath, right? We believe we're better than the competing options than a Lowe's or a Home Depot bathroom that someone throws in there. We believe we're a better option. So let's serve our customer, and we can serve our customer, and I'll end with this, not just by what we sell, but we can serve them by how we sell. We can guide them into a confident buying decision that is in their best interest. And that's what we do at Rebath. So thank you so much for your attentiveness. Pay attention to this material, spend some time with it, and looking forward to hear some of the great results that come from that investment that you make into mastering commitments.
Great. Thank you so much, David, for your time today. And also, you guys, I want to remind you that next week we're going to be having another sales webinar, but this will be our third quarter Q&A webinar. So please start thinking about some questions that are going on out in the field. That can be any specific topic that has to do with sales, the sales presentation, the sales tools, and send those in ahead of time if you'd like to training@rebathcorp.com. And then Dana and David will actually be on the webinar next week, going over and doing that Q&A. So the entire the entire webinar will be just questions and answers the whole time. So please feel free to tell all of your team so that everybody can join in. You guys can type in questions together. I know a lot of you guys do webinars and sit in on it together as a group. So that would be a great webinar next week for you guys. So again, everyone, I want to remind you that this session was recorded and we will be posting it on RB Academy this month. If you would like a copy earlier, please go ahead and email me at training@rebathcorp.com and I'll get that over to you later today. Please take a few minutes also at the end to complete the brief survey that will be sent to you once this webinar is concluded. Have a great rest of your week, and thank you so much for your participation in the Skills Training Sales webinar. This concludes today's session.